Our next speaker, wow, this is pretty impressive stuff. Dr. Wendy Cukier is founder director. She's Vice President of Research and Innovation at Ryerson University, and she leads the Ryerson University strategy to grow research and to promote innovation and commercialization. Previously, she was the Associate Dean of the Ted Rogers School of Management, Canada's largest business school. A leading researcher in her own right, her work focuses on innovation. She has written more than 200 papers on enabling technologies and innovation and is the co-author of the bestseller, Innovation Nation, From Java to Jurassic Park. Everybody got to get that book. In 1999, she founded the Diversity Institute to advance evidence-based strategies to promote inclusion, and she has led several large-scale projects, including the SSHRC-funded Diversity Leads, which involves more than 30 partners, and the Black Experience Project with YMCA and Vronix Institute and United Way. She's an active volunteer working with nonprofit and industry organizations, including the International Women's Forum and the Diversity Forum at the Toronto Region Board of Trade. She's on the board of directors at Vronix Institute, Women's College Hospital, and several high-tech startups. She is the recipient of the Governor General's Meritorious Cross, one of Canada's highest civilian honors. She was also named one of University of Toronto's 100 alumni who shaped the century, and in 2010 was selected one of 25 transformational Canadians by the Globe and Mail, La Presse, and CTV. Dr. Cukier was awarded the YMCA Women of Distinction Award and named it in 2013 Top 25 Women of Influence. Dr. Cukier holds a PhD in Management Science, an MBA in Marketing and Information Systems, and an MA in Social and Cultural History, and an Honors BA in English and History. She has also been awarded an honorary doctorate at University from Laval and an honorary Doctor of Laws from Concordia University. Please put your hands together and welcome Dr. Wendy Cukier.
All that just means I'm really old. In fact, I am so old that I know that Alfreda was wrong when she said that RBC introduced video conferencing 5 years ago. I know that RBC introduced video conferencing more than 30 years ago because I wrote a story about it when they put in a T1 connection between Toronto and Montreal and a $500,000 studio in each site. Anybody here old enough to know that? Just out of curiosity, how many people here are entrepreneurs or aspiring entrepreneurs? And how many people work for large corporations and are interested in innovation in that context? Okay, great. Anyone here from Ryerson? Yay! So every time I say Ryerson, you know what to do. So what I'll try to do is, I know that you're anxious to start to discuss some of what we've talked about in network and so on. And many of the issues that I wanted to raise have already been covered to a certain extent. So I'll try to bump through my presentation fairly quickly and then answer questions as we go along. But remember, I'm used to talking in 3-hour blocks with tests at the end, so I do go on. This is what I wanted to talk a little bit about, Canada's innovation gap. AJ mentioned it. I think it bears some further discussion. What I think we need to strengthen the Canadian innovation ecosystem. It's talked about a lot. I think there's some pieces that particularly need attention, what the role of the university should be in the 21st century, and then some of the things we're doing at Ryerson. So we've already heard one of the big issues is Canada lags in terms of commercialization of technology, productivity, many other things when compared to the United States and other countries, in spite of a very high investment in research. And often the question is, what is happening to all that IP in institutions? When we talk about innovation and entrepreneurship at Ryerson, we consider a whole spectrum, ranging from for-profit organizations through to nonprofits focused on change. So some of you, anyone here involved in social innovation or social ventures and so on? We really embrace the notion that innovation and entrepreneurship pretty much the same regardless of whether you're seeking for-profit or nonprofit objectives. And we also think it's critically important to recognize that innovation and entrepreneurship are not just about startups, but they're about affecting change in large organizations, something that Alfreda talked about. I would say that part of the challenge we have in Canada right now is that people see innovation as different things. When you have a different definition, when you have different goals, you see different strategies, and part of this is because one size doesn't fit all. So if you're looking at innovation in the digital space, if you're looking at developing new apps, the cycles in terms of the speed from which you get your concept to market can be as little as 6 months or a year. The amount of capital and the investment that's required can be trivial. In contrast, if you're trying to get a new drug to market, you're typically talking millions and millions of dollars and perhaps decades. So it's really, often we talk about innovation as if it's one thing, and I'm very much of the view that there are similarities, but we have to be very mindful of the very clear distinctions between sectors. People don't have to take pictures of my slides, they can have them. You can take pictures of me. The other thing that I think is, and this is one of my pet peeves, partly because I work in a business school, and where are the engineers in the room? And the computer scientists? They get all the stuff, right? And so one of my pet peeves is there's a preoccupation with science, technology, engineering, and math, all important foundational disciplines. You need to know how to make stuff. But if nobody uses the technologies, the processes, the products, or the services that you're developing, there is no innovation. That's a bit of a dirty secret. And so my view is we have to focus more attention on issues related to supply, to technology adoption, to building capacity in organizations to change. And it's interesting, we released a report on Monday we did with Rogers looking at the mobile connected workplace, things like Internet of Things and mobile computing and so on. And one of the things that we found was that while Canada leads in consumer adoption of mobile technologies, we lag quite dramatically in terms of corporate adoption of mobile technologies. And coincidentally, Nitin Qualley released the report and made the statements. A couple of days later, the head of Google Canada came out and said very much the same thing. We have a real problem in Canada, not that we don't have technology, but people are not using it. There was a study that was done by the Ontario government that showed that 40% of Ontario small medium enterprises do not even have websites, let alone mobile applications. And so I think it's important to remember that we have lots of technologies, but one of the challenges to innovation in Canada is figuring out how to get more organizations to take advantage of them. And just so you know, I am really old. I was already working in the field for at least 10 years before this quote came out, but look at the last sentence after the dots. The future of medical computing is bright. Obstacles to the practical use of computerized medical records exist, but we may expect these to vanish within a few years. We have a golden opportunity to avoid a new round of escalating medical costs. Okay? 1990, how many years ago was that? 25? And have we got electronic health records, even in this province? No. And in fact, many people think we're going to leapfrog the old notion of centralized healthcare records, and people will be, tattooed and carry the information around on their wrists. So this is an example of technology like video conferencing that we've talked about, not just for years, but for decades, that simply has taken a long time to penetrate the market, not because the technology doesn't work, not because the technology is too expensive, but because there are issues around humans and organizations and politics. I would say doctors are a big part of the problem, that impede innovation, okay? So Associated Press, which supplies stories all over the place, now says, we have discovered the automation technology from a company called Automated Insights will allow us to automate short stories of 150 to 300 words about earnings of companies. And instead of providing 300 stories manually, we can provide up to 4,400 automatically for companies throughout the United States each quarter. Okay? Now, have any of you heard the story that North America will retain knowledge workers and only low-skilled jobs will be automated or outsourced to other countries? You know, there's research that suggests that up to 50% of existing jobs in North America are actually at risk in terms of technology. So you have two extremes, and part of the problem is we don't actually know which way things will necessarily go. So sometimes you have technologies you think make perfectly good sense and everyone should use them, and they should be disruptive and they should be transformational, and you wait 30 years. And sometimes you have something like Uber, you don't even see it coming. And that's one of the challenges of working in this space. So when we think about building a robust innovation ecosystem in Canada, one of the things that I think is critically important, and this is one of the things that came out of the book, Innovation Nation, which is so old none of you want to read it, but was that you have to think not just about the entrepreneur, because there's no question that entrepreneurs come up with great ideas or spot opportunities that other people don't see. But often their success or failure depends on a variety of other factors, including the context at the time, including issues within an organization. There are just as many great innovations in large corporations that are squashed like bugs as there are nurtured and supported. And a lot of that has to do with organizational cultures, with leadership, with processes, and so on. So it's important to recognize there tends to be a bit of hero worship, I think, in the entrepreneurship space, where people think it was this person who drove this change. And that's true if we're talking about social change, just as it is with you know, the famous Steve Jobs and so on. But I would actually argue that it's the intersection of some of these variables that creates the, you know, the perfect storm that allows innovations to thrive. The other reason why levels of analysis are important is the source of innovation varies. So sometimes it is some clever employee who thinks up an idea, or somebody who wants to start a business. Sometimes it's a customer. Procter & Gamble used to have a process of innovation in place where 50% of the new ideas for products had to come from outside the organization. Sometimes it's driven by changes in the regulatory environment. So it's important to recognize that no one thing drives innovation, and that's why we argue that you need this kind of analysis. And I have a lot of slides about this stuff that I won't talk about because it's kind of boring. I do think this notion, though, of what an entrepreneur is important, and we talk a lot about, you know, are they made or are they born? And really, an entrepreneur is just someone who challenges the status quo, whether it's the status quo in a social context, in an existing business, or someone who thinks up a new idea or product. And we have done a lot of research on some of the things that distinguish entrepreneurs from other people. And in fact, there's good evidence that suggests that a for-profit entrepreneur, a social activist, and an artist often have more in common than an entrepreneur and the CEO of any bank other than RBC. And some of those, the strongest predictor of whether someone will be an entrepreneur or not is whether they had a parent who was an entrepreneur, or a farmer. Farmers are entrepreneurs. Because if you grow up, how many people in the room had a parent who was self-employed or an entrepreneur? Don't make a liar of me. There you go. Because if you grow up in that context, typically you're accustomed to feast and famine, right? As one of the people I interviewed for the book said, we'd sit around the dinner table talking about Dad's latest venture, and either we'd be eating craft dinner for a year or we'd be going to Disneyland. And that was the context people grew up in. So they didn't shape their aspirations in terms of working for government or GM, I'm from a GM town, or for a large bank. They thought from a very early age that they'd do what mom or dad did and run their own business. There's also other traits you see in entrepreneurs: single-mindedness. Confidence is absolutely essential, and so often when we're working particularly with women, that's one of the things that we have to focus on. And there is scientific evidence that shows that there is an overrepresentation of entrepreneurs with attention deficit disorder, and it shows. That's why they can spot the opportunities, because they can see things that other people don't see. But fundamentally, I think Drucker was right when he said that entrepreneurship is not really in the genes, it's a mindset. And also Lazaridis, who said, you can't teach it from a textbook. It's something you have to experience. So what does that mean for universities? Ryerson is quite different. Ryerson, I said Ryerson? Okay. Where are my people when I need them? Ryerson is a bit different because it was a polytechnic, so you go to business school at Ryerson and you're taught by people who have worked outside of a university, and I've been to 2 other business schools in the city, and that's not always the case. But in general, in the 20th century, the notion of the ivory tower really has to be eroded, because increasingly people have to understand that universities can be a driver of innovation, job creation, and wealth. Traditionally in universities, there's this notion of lab to market. You let the researchers do the research, and if you're really lucky, some of that will be a cure for cancer or a new technology. And I'm very much committed to the idea of fundamental research, because often you can't predict what the application of research will be. John Polanyi, the Nobel Prize winner, gives a good example. He said that one of the major innovations in silicon chip manufacturing came from discoveries in lobster ophthalmology, which is exactly what it sounds like. The study of lobster eyes helped them develop techniques that they were able to apply to cutting silicon chips more effectively. It has something to do with use of mirrors. So we need traditional university research where you leave people in their labs to, do things. But increasingly, we need market-driven research and innovation. So some of the things Alfreda talked about in a university context is a company comes, or a social agency comes with a grand challenge, with a problem, with an issue, and instead of happenstance and throwing the idea over the ivory tower wall into the market and hoping it lands, which results in a lot of flying pigs being created, you start from a problem that you're trying to solve. And I think this is something that Ryerson has really excelled at. The other thing that we think is important in the university of the 21st century is embedding entrepreneurship and innovation across disciplines, Even if you're in nursing or social work or photography, you need to be able to challenge the status quo. You need to have the confidence to see new opportunities, and you need to understand the processes to affect change. And oh my God, you need to be able to read a financial statement regardless of what discipline you're in and regardless of what your career aspirations are. And it's interesting because China, how many of you have been to China? China decided that all its students, every student in the country, should have a course in entrepreneurship. And in China, you can say, make it so, and it happens. In Canada, that would take a few years. So at Ryerson, we're very interested in this notion of building the ecosystem and growing entrepreneurs, and you have to look at awareness, you have to engage people in competitions. We do tons of hackathons, we do dragonish dens, et cetera, et cetera. We run courses. We have the biggest entrepreneurship program in the country. We run a thing called Summer Company for kids who are returning to school. But really, you can only learn entrepreneurship by practicing it. So one of the things Ryerson has done is developed a very extensive network of incubators and accelerators to support not just Ryerson students and alumni, but people from other universities, startups, and so on. And our digital media zone, how many of you have been to the digital media zone? That's good, that's good. Digital Media Zone is ranked one of the, well, the top incubator in Canada, one of the top 5 in the world. It's been doing really well, and the model is now being replicated. So, for example, we just signed an agreement a year ago with the Bombay Stock Exchange, and we've effectively set up a DMZ in Mumbai. We're setting up a DMZ in Johannesburg with the University of Witwatersrand. Thank you. Say it again. Thank you. And we're doing one in Tsinghua in Poland, and I don't know where. But the model seems to be working. We were also funded by the federal government to build a national network of incubators working with Simon Fraser University and UOIT, focused on digital technology and gaming. Some of you may have seen the recent $25 million announcement for Scale Up Ventures, which is a fund that will help companies through the valley of death. We're partnering in that, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So we're doing some, oh, and we're a partner in the 111 Big Data Incubator with OMERS and OCE and some others. So we're doing some things that other universities are now also starting to do that are aimed at supporting entrepreneurs, and we've had some big successes. You can read about them. The other thing, though, that we do is we partner with industry and community organizations and hospitals to try to drive innovation in existing organizations. And partnerships are mutually beneficial for a variety of reasons. Here are some of them. RBC should be in there somewhere. They are one of our valued partners, but we couldn't list them all. And the other thing that I think we're doing that aligns very nicely with the interests of many of the people in the room is we're also trying to really support Canadian companies going global, and we're trying in particular to leverage the Diaspora Networks. As you know, in Toronto, 50% of the population was born outside the country. That can present certain kinds of barriers to getting access to funding and jobs, and we all know those stories. But it also offers tremendous assets in a world where we increasingly need to go global. And so we're trying to find ways to partner with many of the immigrant entrepreneurship organizations to leverage that, and some of you can see the program we're running. We're partnering with the Ontario Chamber of Commerce to develop an innovation portal to support small businesses and startups. primarily because there are tons and tons and tons of government programs. There's lots of money out there to support small, medium enterprises, to support entrepreneurs, lots of incubators. It's finding the right stuff that you need when you need it that is a challenge, and we've been told this by many SMEs. I got too much work to do to meet payroll on Friday. I do not have time to figure out the grants and fill out the applications. So we're actually using students as low-cost labor, paid interns, where they're getting work experience helping SMEs navigate some of those programs. And we're hoping that this will be a win-win-win-win-win collaboration. So I think, you know, from our point of view, as was mentioned by AJ, there's lots of stuff going on in this space in Canada. Right now, there's a lot of fragmentation. And the more that we can do to share resources and to make sure that people know about the resources that are available from the wide variety of organizations and groups in this space, the better. I have a few pet peeves. I think we do have to support scaling up. You know, it's one thing to have lots of startups, but we need the next big thing. And so more attention on how we help companies get past the valley of death from when they have their first customer or two to when they become really viable is important. I've already told you, I think we need to focus on the demand for new technologies, not just the supply. I think, I won't say anything about Mars. However, I think that increasingly, you know, as we're putting more and more money into more and more initiatives, there might be some value in doing, you know, assessments of what we're getting for those investments. I think that we also need to really pay attention to innovation in government and the public sector. When you think about the structure of the Canadian economy, if you only focus on the private sector and you don't pay attention to innovation in the social sector, and you don't pay attention to innovation in government or the MUSH sector, you're missing a huge opportunity. And given you know, the competition for resources we're all going to face, it's critically important. And I would say, I'm the first person to say, in fact, someone I think wrote it down and I'm going to be in trouble next week, but I'm the first to say universities are medieval institutions. Probably the only sector that is more backward than universities is maybe the legal profession in terms of the use of technology and new approaches. And hospitals, well, you saw, you know, we've been talking about e-health for 30 years without making adequate progress. And given the pressing concerns around healthcare in this country, we have to grapple with some of those issues. So that's plenty to talk about now. I think the final point is the most important. All of us need to be concerned about job creation. And so those of you who are aspiring entrepreneurs and successful entrepreneurs really are the engine of our economic and social development. So I thank you, and we'd like to help you.